When Pokemon introduced abilities back in Gen 3, it was meant to give each Pokemon something unique that set them apart from the rest. But sometimes Game Freak decides to give Pokemon abilities that actively work against them or completely ruin their competitive viability. There are some Pokemon with insanely high stats, great typings, and solid movesets that should be absolute monsters in competitive play, but they're held back by abilities so bad that they basically make the Pokemon unusable. In this video, I'm going to be going over some of the best examples of Pokemon that got completely screwed over by their abilities. Archeops is one of the most common examples of this. He has an insanely good attack stat of 140 and a speed stat of 110, which are considerably above average and would normally be enough to compensate for its mediocre typing of rock and flying, but he also has the ability Defeatist, which halves both of its attack and special attack when its HP drops below 50%. This is especially devastating for Archeops because it has terrible bulk, with only 75 HP and 65 in both defenses, which means it's pretty easy to get it below half HP. To make things worse, as I said before, Archeops is also a rock and flying type, which means it's 4 times weak to Stealth Rock, so just switching into a Stealth Rock immediately brings it down to half health, and activates the Defeatist ability. This means Archeops is basically unusable in any format where Stealth Rock is common, which is basically every single competitive format. The fetus only activates when you're below half health, so theoretically you can get some use out of Archeops before it gets nerfed. It did get Roost in later gens, which lets it heal back above 50% HP, but with its terrible bulk, it's very hard to find opportunities to actually use Roost without getting yourself completely screwed over. Some people try to run Archeops with Focus Sash or use it as a lead with Stealth Rock and U-Turn, but at that point you're just better off using something like Aerodactyl. Like, the potential is there for Archeops to be really good, or at least competitively viable, but the Defeatist just completely ruins it, and its poor typing doesn't help it either. Slacking is one of the most notorious examples of this. It has a base stat total of 670, which is higher than most legendary Pokemon. Its 160 base attack ties it with Groudon and Kyogre, and it has 150 HP, which makes it incredibly bulky as well. On paper, Slacking should be one of the most dominant Pokemon in the entire game, but it is completely ruined by its ability Truant. I don't know if I pronounced that right. Truant makes Slacking unable to attack every other turn, so after you use a move, you're forced to just sit there and do nothing while your opponent gets a free turn to either set up, attack, or switch out, or whatever they want basically. And this is absolutely devastating in competitive play because one free turn is all it takes for your opponent to completely turn the battle around. The thing that makes Truant so bad is that it's predictable. Experienced players can just use Protect on the turn Slacking attacks and then go for the kill on the turn it's loafing around. There are some neat strategies like using Giga Impact which forces a recharge either way, but at that point you're just better off using a completely different Pokemon. People have tried to make Slacking work with Skill Swap or Gastro Acid in doubles to remove Truant, but that requires dedicating an entire team slot just to make one Pokemon functional, which honestly isn't really worth it 90% of the time when you can just use an equally strong pseudo-legendary Pokemon. Regigigas is even worse off than Slacking in my opinion. It has 160 base attack and 110 in both of its defenses, with 100 speed. But Game Freak decided to give it the ability Slow Start, which is arguably the worst ability in the entire game. Slow Start halves Regigigas' attack and speed stats for the first 5 turns after it enters the battle, and this counter resets every single time you switch out. So for the first 5 turns, Regigigas' 160 attack becomes 80 and its speed becomes 50. To put this into perspective, during Slow Start, Regigigas is slower than Onix and does less damage than Rhyhorn. There's no reliable way to work around Slow Start either, and unlike Slacking, you can't use Skill Swap or Gastro Acid to remove it in the older generations, and even in double battles where you can remove it, you're dedicating so much resources just to make one Pokemon functional that it's not worth it. Like, at that point, I just use another legendary Pokemon. Now, you're probably wondering why Game Freak would intentionally ruin Pokemon with these terrible abilities, and the answer is pretty simple. These Pokemon would be absolutely broken without them. If Slacking didn't have Truant, it would basically be a normal type Groudon. It would have the highest attack stat in the game with incredible bulk and a decent speed stat. It would completely dominate OU and probably end up getting banned with Ubers, where like the legendaries are. Same with Regigigas, without Slow Start, it would just be one of the strongest legendary Pokemon in the game. 160 attack stat, 110 in both of its defenses, and 100 speed. It's very hard to counter Pokemon like this, I'm not gonna lie. Archeops is a bit different since it's not a legendary, but 140 attack and 110 speed with decent special attack would make it way too strong for a regular Pokemon. Or I mean, maybe not way too strong, but it would definitely be at the level of like pseudo legendaries, especially with stab acrobatics and head smash. I feel like it would be similar to I feel like it would be similar to Halucha in Gen 6 when it was going crazy with the herb sets. Game Freak's philosophy seems to be creating really strong Pokemon and then giving them a crush or a condition, which I like in concept, right? Because obviously we don't want a normal Pokemon like Slacking running around with 670 base stats. But I also feel like they could have just executed this so much better. Instead of giving like Slacking, for example, stats that rival literal god Pokemon, I feel like lowering his stats just a bit and giving him an ability that is still a debuff, but not as crippling would have just been a better solution. I'm going to present a solution for every single one of these Pokemon that should still fix their issue while still keeping them somewhat balanced. For Slacking, they could change Truant to only activate every third turn instead of every second turn, or they could give it a secondary effect, like Slacking's attack is increased by 50% on turns where it can attack. So like that's kind of overpowered at the same time. Look, yeah, I might need to like rethink some of these. Take everything I say with a grain of salt because I'm kind of spitfiring here. But anyways, for Regigigas, they could reduce slow start from 5 turns to 3 turns, or they could just make it so switching out doesn't reset the counter. How they could even make it so Regigigas starts at full power but loses stats over time, which would at least get you some use out of it early game, and I think that would be a lot more cool. Though at the same time, that might also just end up making it worse for longer fights. It's kind of... Wait, okay, so what if it's like you start off with full stats, and if you switch out, it gets, like, the timer gets reset, so it doesn't decay as much. So, like, let's say I send in my Regigigas, right? It has all of its stats, and then it starts losing stats after, like, 2 to 3 turns. I bring it back, and I send it back in, and it's back at full power, and the timer gets reset. I feel like that would be a lot cooler, and it would also, like, make sense, since it is, like, a legendary Pokemon. And as for Archeops, this is pretty simple as well. They could just change the fetus to only reduce its stats by like 25% instead of 50, or they could just make it so the fetus doesn't activate if Archeops is holding like a certain item, or like basically just anything compared to what it currently has. They could also just increase its bulk a little bit too, which could end up bad. But like I feel like with an ability like the fetus, even if you do up its base stats, it's still gonna end up making the Pokemon pretty trash. Alright, yo, I'm gonna end the video off there. If you guys did enjoy, make sure to like and subscribe. And my bad for like a bit of the background noise at the end. My mom was doing some stuff in the background, so yeah. If I missed any Pokemon with like a really bad ability, comment it below. For this video, I decided to only go for Pokemon that are basically like locked to a singularly trash ability. So even if like some Pokemon do have a trash ability, if they have access to other abilities, I try to avoid them. And I also try to avoid Mega Pokemon because like I've made a lot of videos on Megas. I didn't want to like continuously come back to them over and over again. But yeah, see you.